afternoon. Welcome to our panel. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Elizabeth Green. I'm with Chalkbeat, and I wrote a book called Building a Better Teacher that is one of the reasons I think I'm moderating this exciting panel. What we are talking about today is the role of teacher preparation going forward in reaching Teach for America's big goal, I think the goal of most of the people in this room, of making sure that education is great in this country for all children. We're going to talk about what teacher preparation looks like today and what it should look like ideally, and then how to get there. And to talk about this, we have four excellent panelists today. Next to me, we have Tom Stridicus, who leads grant making at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on areas that include teacher preparation. He also is the first Teach for America alumni that I know of to run an ed school. He previously was the dean of the College of Education at the University of Washington. We also have Susan Asianbi. She works with Teach for America as an executive vice president, leading everything from selection of teachers to training and support of current corps members and alumni. We also have Carl Grant, Dr. Carl Grant, who's a longtime teacher educator and professor of teacher education at the University of Wisconsin. His research focus is multicultural education. And finally, we have Norman Atkins. We have a popularity contest in this room. We have Norman Atkins, who's the co-founder and president of the Relay Graduate School of Education, one of the new emerging models for teacher preparation in this country, as well as the founder and chairman of Uncommon Schools, the charter management organization. So that's who we are. Quickly want to get a sense of who you guys are. I'm going to ask you to identify yourself through applause. Are you ready? All right. How many current classroom teachers do we have in the room with us? Awesome. How many teacher educators do we have in the room with us? How many of you are consumers of teacher education? That is, how many of you hire teachers as part of your responsibilities? All right, I have a really great mathematical mind, so that was about 20%, 20%, 20%. I can hear really well and do percentages well, so that was exactly accurate. Final question, how many of you who taught believe that you were adequately prepared? And before you answer, I want to say, of course, I think everyone here knows teaching is a lifelong learning challenge. Teachers are lifelong learners, but how many of you were day one what you would say is adequately prepared to teach? All right, can't wait to ask you guys about your experience. How many of you were not adequately prepared on day one? Okay, I think that's a great entree into our discussion here. What we're going to do is we're going to spend about 50 minutes having a discussion. Then the final 30 minutes, we're going to invite a whole group discussion to the best of our pedagogical abilities. We're relying on high-tech innovation called index cards. So you will see staff members walk through the aisle to pass out index cards. When you see an index card, if you have a question that you'd like to share with the whole group, please write that down and write also your name if you're comfortable. You can also ask anonymously, but if you write your name, then once we look at all the questions, we'll then be able to invite you to the microphone to elaborate a bit on your question. So look out for those index cards, and are you guys ready? Let's begin. The first thing I want to ask you is, all of you have, I think, deep thoughts on what the ideal system should look like to ensure that all teachers are ready to serve all students. And I know it's very hard to prioritize the many elements of that system, but I'd like you to each try to say the top 3 priorities of what that ideal teacher prep system looks like, and we're just going to go right down the line.
Great.
Tom.
So thanks for being here. It's amazing to see so many people interested in teacher preparation. I don't think when I started the Corps in 1990, a session would have drawn this much attention, so it's great. The top three, I would say, I think a system needs to be driven by the needs of the school systems and the children it serves. So preparation needs to be governed, driven exactly by what schools need on the ground. I think there needs to be a system for understanding how candidates do once they enter the field and feeding that data back into programs themselves for program improvement. And then there needs to be some spirit of like optimism and fun and excitement. Like most teacher preparation conversations are dreadfully boring, and this is really exciting stuff, and sometimes that doesn't translate into the work. So this should be fun and full of joy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Susan.
Yes, can you all hear me? Great. So I'm going to take a slightly different approach than what Tom took and talk about the system mostly from the perspective of the types of things I'd hope people be feeling, thinking, doing in a teacher preparation program. So I would say the first thing is I would really hope to see more programs that are really centered around the system of inequity that exists related to race, class, and privilege in our country, and having teachers really understand the why that exists, what's the history behind that. What does that then mean in terms of the types of leaders that they need to be for children and the vision for what it's going to take for our students to actually realize their full potential? I would say the second thing I would really hope for is seeing the child as a whole child, and like what does it actually take for a child to have enduring success? So everything from knowing that academics actually does matter in terms of having the skill and competence, to ensuring students have like the access that is necessary for them to like have doors open to them, to having social and political awareness of like their surroundings, to the personal leadership traits that matter. And at Teach for America, we call those broader outcomes, but really pushing ourselves to actually see the child as a whole child and not just individual aspects of that. And then the last thing I would say is that I would hope for in the system is a way to really elevate the respect and craft of teaching. In terms of, like, I think about my time at coming out of college and hearing my parents very much dismayed when I told them what I would be doing, which is I'm going into the classroom. And wanting a world where we are thinking about how do we legitimize the profession of teaching, where there's more practice time, we're starting much earlier, we're going much later. It's not seen as a moment in time, but the master of teaching. And so those would be, I would say, the three things that I would hope to see more of in the system.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. The three things that I think, first, really understanding the people who are coming into the program and helping the people who come into the program to understand who they are and why they are there and really why they want to teach and what they want to go forward to do. Helping them to take an inward look before they begin to look out. The second thing I would work on is helping them to really know and understand the children that they're going to teach. Love is fine, but what does love really mean? When you're right down with it, what is the interpretation of love? The third thing I think would be helpful is to knowing the structures that press down upon you, to understand where you're going to teach, the environment where you're going to work, and understand how to operate within that context once you enter the school. Who's the person? How will you meet and talk to the person next door? Your colleague. How will you meet and talk to the children's parents when they come up? How do you greet the clerk in the office when you see them? Basically, one, knowing yourself. Two, getting to work at knowing the children and figuring out how to work with the children. And then the third one, understanding where you're going, and realizing, as it was said in the last session, that we are in a toxic environment.
So just coming off of a panel where we talked about faith in education, so allow me to be a little utopic in my vision and answer to this question. So number one, in an ideal system, the 40% of 18-year-olds who think about going into teaching will have 4 or 5 years of opportunities during their late high school and undergraduate years to explore teaching through tutoring, through teaching in summer school, through undergraduate residencies and experiences, and there will be a GI Bill for teachers to attract people from the communities where they're going to be teaching, people who are full of love, people who have a growth mindset, and people who know the content. And so by the end of college, the prospective teachers will know whether or not they want to work in a school and what it's like, and the schools will know whether these folks are a right match. Secondly, the training that they would get would be very skills-based. They would learn how to teach in the classrooms in the schools where they're working, and they would have tons of deliberate practice opportunities to get good at the very complicated, difficult craft of teaching. And third, the work would be embedded in the classrooms and schools, that the teaching candidates would be in the classrooms of really good teachers. Something like the residency model that we see aborting today would be the rule for all, because an apprenticeship probably is the best way for people to begin their teaching careers.
All right, so I think, what is 3 times 4? We have a lot of priorities here, and there's different things that you are prioritizing. I don't know why no one shouted out 12.
They were intimidated by your math.
Very intimidated by my percentage skills, my math skills. So I heard a few things that some folks said and others didn't. I heard Tom mention data. I didn't hear anyone else mention data. I heard at least 2 people, I think maybe 2.5, say it's important to have an understanding of systemic racism and the context that we're operating in. Does someone want to comment on maybe data and then context? Why, Tom, would you prioritize, why didn't you prioritize the context of racism and other structural inequities in our country?
So, great question. I appreciate it. I think the way I'm thinking about it, and the way we thought about it in the Foundation's launch of some of the funding we've done in Teacher Prep, is that if we got very clear about what school districts need and what kids need, and you have those needs drive the system of teacher preparation, that in essence you are answering that question directly in a way, and not having that be defined at the program level. I think that would be my question back to some of the conversations around how we take race and equity on. Is this defined at the teacher preparation institution, be it alternative or traditional, or are we diving into the community and the district and really taking those conversations up? And I think I heard people talk about that, and we could go into depth of what that looks like. But that would, for me, be how are we actually mining from the community and the districts what is needed, and making sure that that is front and center in how we guide preparation.
So is there a difference between prioritizing what a community needs and just prioritizing understanding of these systemic factors across the board? Or is that the same
I think
thing?
I'd ask the community. I mean, I think not to block the question, but I think I'd ask the community. I mean, I think that's the conversation we have to be asking our partners, who are the consumers, as you called them, out.
Do you want to comment?
Yeah, I agree. I would say, I would probably say both. Like, I think there's something in terms of leaders doing their own self-work to understand history and not asking the community to be teachers of us. And at the same time, as we do our history, being willing to be humble enough to be learners and ask the community, given what I've learned, what does the context require and deserve and need? So that's how I would respond to that. And then to the, like, there's 12 different priorities. Like, what do you make of that? My own personal opinion is that if we talk about differentiation for students and the fact that they require and need, they have different working styles and different learning needs, I think that is no different than adults. I think our adults see the world in lots of different ways, and there's beauty in that, and that we have to become more open to knowing that there are differentiated pathways to learning and differentiated pathways to teacher preparation as well. And so I actually think it's beautiful to have different priorities and different preparation programs that have different ways of prioritizing and moving into the system, because I think it creates opportunities for leaders to know themselves, know their own assets and how they learn, and figure out what is the pathway that is going to best enable them to, like, really show up as their best selves.
Okay, so I guess there's some agreement then that this is important, but you're also saying, Susan, different programs can have different priorities, and that's healthy and positive. Carl, do you want to comment on whether that's okay? Is it okay for some programs not to prioritize what another program is going to prioritize, or is there some kind of baseline need for every teacher in this country to have some understanding of self, some understanding of race and class?
Well, first of all, I think we need to realize we live in the United States. We need to understand the legacy of the United States. We need to understand that Teach for America often prepares teachers to teach in urban areas or areas in which there is a great deal of diversity. When one looks at the history of the U.S., looks at the educational system in the U.S., and one of the reasons for Teach for America was to push back and make a difference, then out of necessity, you would need to look at the context of where people are going to work, so they would be prepared to work in those situations.
To what degree do current programs do a good job of preparing teachers to teach in the context of that Teach for America is working on? Where are the biggest gaps and where is the bright spots? Norman?
We're not getting, it's possible that we're not getting the right people to start teaching in the first place. That we haven't done an all call to the talented people across the country who really want to make a difference and really want to fight for justice through teaching and really want to love through teaching, to choose it as something that they really want to get good at and do for their careers. We're not doing a good job of that. We're not doing a good job of providing the incentives, the economic incentives for people to be teachers and lead a middle-class life. We're not doing a good job of that. Teacher preparation programs that are focused on making people into leaders are going to make leaders. And Teach for America, with 42,000 alums and 8,000 core members, probably is one of the greatest nonprofits in the history of the United States at creating leaders. But for teachers, we need to help people get really good at their craft, and we need to start in the shallow end of the pool and not in the deep end of the pool. And we've got to give people a lot of time to develop their skills so that they can feel successful and be successful over time.
Part of what Norman is saying, I agree with. But I've been teaching at the University of Wisconsin-Madison for 40 years. Every student who comes in my class who says they want to teach, say they want to teach because they love kids and they want to help kids. When I tell them, if you go to the typical parking lot of a school, you don't see a Mercedes out there. You don't see a Jaguar out there. That these people come because they say they love. In the last session, I was with Teach for America in 1990, at the very beginning. The 500 core members that first came to Teach for America also came with that disposition. When I use the word disposition, that takes into account not only the skills they come with, but the disposition, the attitude, and the knowledge they come with. Skills are fine. Knowledge is tremendously important. And one of the things I saw with Teach for America was that they had the knowledge. They were considered the best and brightest. What we were working on were disposition and attitude, basically taking love and helping them to understand what love means in the morning when you're working with a 6-year-old kid who probably didn't have his or her breakfast in the morning or had a rough night at home. Love is more than just putting your arms around people and saying you care. So it's not only the skills that one needs, it's the disposition that they need to hang in there for the long run. I agree that it takes a long time. I would love to see every member of Teach for America stay here for the duration, not just come in, do 3 or 4 years, and head to medical school or dental school or the business school, but to be in it for the long run, because it takes a good time to learn how to teach.
Let's jump in on that point. And how, in the middle of the room, can you hear me? Raise your hand if you have trouble hearing. All right, great. Let's talk about Teach for America. Teach for America was created 25 years ago and was attacked by ed schools. Here we are today. Teach for America is hosting this large discussion with lots of people attending about the importance of teacher preparation. What is the role of Teach for America in evolving towards a system that more highly prioritizes the lifelong learning of teachers? Susan.
So I would say, 25 years past, right? 25 years past, Teach for America's vision, and continues to be its vision and mission statement, are related to knowing that great teachers in front of students actually matters, and getting folks who can see the transformative nature of the power of what they can bring to a student, and the system in which our students are living in actually can be powerful in terms of getting many more leaders into this work. I would also say that as 25 years forward, there's been a ton of learning in terms of how do you actually develop the art and craft of teaching as a form of leadership. So everything from the broader outcomes that I talked about to being much more in partnership and in relationship with other teacher preparation programs who have specific types of disciplines. So for example, Tom, when he was working at the University of Washington and Teach for America partnered on a pilot to really think about how can we be accelerating our teachers' ability to actually do exactly what Norm just talked about, like be prepared, feel like they understand their content, can teach day to day, understand that the work that we're doing is not just about the 2 to 3 years, but is a lifelong commitment to children and communities. And so I would say that has been the evolution, is more or less finding all of the synergies and coalitions of other organizations, other partners who are doing things that they are uniquely capable of doing, and really figuring out how do we forge the vision part of what we believe with the craft.
So Teach for America itself will never be the sole provider of teacher education.
Absolutely.
There's lots of different models for how to make these changes that we're talking about today. I want to ask you guys to talk first about the choice that we face between should innovation happen in a university context or should it happen outside a university context? Obviously the people here have placed their bets differently when it comes to that question. So I'm just going to open it up to the field. What are the challenges of operating inside a university context or outside of it, and where should we place our bets? Who'd like to go first? Okay.
So I'd say a couple things about that from my experience as being dean at the University of Washington is I think 5 years ago, Norman and I were on a panel, the Teach for America 20th anniversary celebration. And we were like frenemies because I was in ed school.
You look even better now.
I look better now, yeah. We were sort of frenemies. I was an ed school dean and he was an emerging, soon-to-be president of Relay University. But I think even in that conversation 5 years ago, the context that started to emerge is this is less about the place that it happens and more about what happens in those places. And when Teach for America came in the region in Washington State, and we had a program that had very strong content teaching, but frankly was weak in some other areas, And we asked the question, what could you do to actually prepare teachers who had some experience, but to really get them deeply embedded in content in a competency-based program? Could they take on the work in really real ways? And the ideological debates around, no, it's reform, it's this, it's reform versus status quo, it's charter versus district, and actually debates around the content of the work really changed the conversation. So I think this has to be about what we do, not where we do it.
Okay, so it is possible after your experience working in a traditional university to innovate a university. I mean, I've done reporting about universities that try to make changes. It's very challenging to turn these institutions, some of their practices that have been historically embedded, to change them. But you think it is possible and worth investing in.
I think, yeah, I mean, as a philanthropist now, we think it's possible, but it's not a guarantee. I mean, I think there are certain conditions that have to be in place for this to happen, but it is possible.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it would be great for universities and Teach for America and other organizations that work with the preparation of teachers to meet and talk. I mean, innovation takes place wherever it takes place, and you want to welcome that innovation. At the bottom line are the children. So why are adults fighting about who's going to do it best? Why can't people come together and begin to work at it? Let's not lose sight of who we're doing this for.
Norman, we're hearing that we don't need to have these fights, but the fights do exist, right? When Relay comes to a community, does every university embrace with open arms? I know from our own reporting that's not the case.
They should. Gosh, there are 1,400 schools of education, teacher prep programs within higher ed in the United States, and reforming teacher preparation feels to me slower than the work of reforming K-12 education.
Fascinating.
And changing the grooves and traditions and economics of higher education feels in many ways more complicated than doing it within K-12 schools. And for those higher ed institutions that want to and will by necessity have to change over the next decade or two, here's a whopping invitation to innovate in the cause of social justice and reform. And I hope that there are lots of other traditional institutions that will join us in this particular work, because I think at the end of the day, in order for teacher preparation to be rigorous, it probably needs to happen within higher education. And then we've got to basically get down from the ivory tower and the hill and make sure that the work and the training and the development really is embedded in schools.
And I think this is a great moment also to take a pause. Maybe some people in the room don't know about Relay's model. Can you just quickly summarize what is Relay an institution of higher education? Is it something outside of that? Is it like the charter school of ed schools?
Yeah,
Give like just a 1 minute, no more than 1 minute.
Relay is a nonprofit accredited institution of higher education that runs master degree programs, certification programs, training and development for 1,700 principals and teachers across the United States. We have campuses in 8 cities, and we're growing, and we're really just about trying to help teachers and principals get really good, really fast at the craft of teaching, and give them the support, the observation, the feedback from people who've been doing this work for a long time in public schools to be able to get better. And it's all in the service of student learning outcomes.
I'd love to hear too, Susan, your take, because Teach for America, you said, has a partnership strategy here. And the partners, I understand, include a whole spectrum of traditional, non-traditional. What are the advantages of working with non-traditional partners, and what percentage of the partners that TFA works with are traditional versus non-traditional?
So I would say the advantages of working with non-traditional partners, I just think a diversity of perspective, to be honest, in terms of different ways of seeing how you prepare teachers that may be slightly different than our traditional ways of the standard content areas. I think working with the non-traditional partners is actually what has pushed us to think about teacher preparation not just as like academics, which has been the historical foray that we've had in terms of what is the vision that you want for the classroom, what is the vision of what's needed for students, and then how do we use academics as a pathway to that. And working with non-traditional programs have really pushed us on, in order for folks to actually understand their children, they have to understand themselves. What is the work that you are doing there? And then in order for teachers to actually really have true partnerships, they have to understand the benefit of relationships. Are we doing work that not only talks about the content areas, but are we actually saying to our teachers, going into the communities that you're going into, what is the work that you're doing to build relationships? And what does it actually mean to be in relationship with someone so that there is mutuality and not a one-way street?
So kind of reading between the lines and drawing my own knowledge, a lot of university teacher prep programs are not preparing in the way that Carl Grant focuses on preparing. It's an anomaly to have a program prepare for the context that TFA goes into.
Absolutely. And so I think really it's an expansion of seeing a broader set of things that are actually required for a teacher.
And what's one example of an innovative partner that you're learning from
Yeah.
about how to do that kind of teacher education?
So, yeah.
Also, like, just applause for the lighting technology in this room. I think this is, it's really fun to sometimes see your guys' faces, so thank you.
It's run by an ed school.
All right, wait. Oh.
Yes. Goodness.
Yeah, you guys are being too polite. Like, I need to hear more of the challenges of working at an ed school.
So I will say
First innovation, though.
Yes, one of the innovations that we've incorporated more into our work is we have a belief that diversity matters, both in terms of diversity of the students that we teach as well as the diversity of the leaders that we have in front of our students and the inclusivity of that. And so we've actually been working with someone who has actually joined our staff as a real consultant to help us better understand culturally relevant pedagogy. Which is both about understanding the assets of the work that exists within our students and how do we affirm those sets of things, but also really pushing on, it's not enough to just value diversity, how is that translated into how folks lead and teach in the classroom? And if there's a way in which, whether it be in teaching math and teaching history, that our students and their identities and affirmation of who they are can actually be reflected in the curriculum. And so I would say that's an innovation of a world where we had an ethos of what our commitment was, and like really the partnership helped pushed on having an ethos and not translating that into the how can be problematic.
So getting much more specific about what does it mean to do culturally relevant pedagogy rather than just a broad commitment to serving all kids and serving high poverty kids and serving kids of color. Carl, what does culturally relevant pedagogy look like, and why doesn't it? Why do you think most ed schools are not preparing, or do you agree that most ed schools are not preparing teachers for diverse
Listen,
communities?
the United States of America is not preparing its students. When you boil it down and you say ed schools, what you set up is a dichotomy. I would argue we need to work on this together. I mean, we can find flaws with, we don't have this correct. Teach for America's been out here for 25 years. There are changes being made with Teach for America. Much more parent involvement is one of the things that's being talked about. So I don't come here from the university saying, I can't work with Teach for America, or they do this better, we do that better. What I am saying is it depends on the institution. Out at the institution, I believe where Norman comes from, Tom comes from. You had some beautiful scholars there. Ken Zeichner, Jim Banks. Those people were out there fighting to make a difference with teachers and teacher education. And they go across the country. They want to work together. Why set up the differences Why can't we do this together? Because once again, it's the children.
Why talk about differences in institutions? Did you experience, when you think about your grant making, Tom, is it a relevant question to ask what kind of an institution is going to do the work and why?
I think it is. So I'd give two examples. So when the federal government started, I'll just get a little wonky for a moment, and we'll pull it back. But when an idea that came up on the panel 5 years ago, just to connect history, was Brad Jupp. And Brad Jupp was talking about the negotiated rulemaking around states actually ranking colleges of education, top third being eligible for certain types of funding, and so on. There was just absolute, complete pushback from most ed schools around that, less so from the alternative community. There were a group of deans for Impact, led by Ben Riley, who kind of led the charge and actually supported that work. And I'd say the same thing around.
And just to summarize, this is kind of like bringing the accountability that No Child Left Behind led to K-12 to teacher prep
partially.
institutions?
I mean, just the quick characterization. I don't know if I'd say that completely. But I think one of the things that we laid down in the Transformation Center funding work that we're doing is that we weren't going to fund institutions that didn't take their teacher-educator quality seriously. That is, that they had some standards to evaluate who was doing the teaching. I think we have to be honest with ourselves. That is very difficult to sometimes do in a university context. Not impossible, but difficult. So I completely agree with Carl that and that's how we took this work on at the University of Washington. This is not about where preparation happens. It really is about what is happening, but we do need to think very carefully about how what is happening sometimes acts or doesn't act in the interest of particular organizations. So quick question for the audience. Of those in teacher prep, working in teacher prep, how many are working in sort of what we'd call university-based providers? Do the applause of the hand. Okay. And then how many would be in sort of what we'd classify as alternative providers? Okay. So, I mean, so anyway, it's just good to hear that mix. So that's my thoughts on that.
You mentioned the idea that Brad Jupp put forward as part of the Obama administration saying, let's ask institutions that prepare teachers to be held accountable for how their candidates do when they enter the field. How effective do folks on this panel think that data-based accountability will be for bringing the changes that you're envisioning, especially Susan, given your idea of broader outcomes that are important? Who wants to talk about that?
Gosh, I wish I wish there were good assessments that were vertically aligned across K-12 that you could use to measure student learning outcomes and attach that to teachers. I think that was part of the fantasy of the last round of education reforms, and it is, as you all know, not going to come to pass. Secondly, it is an open question whether or not you should use those assessments to mark somebody's ability to teach in just 1 year or 2 years in their early part of their teaching careers. 3, it is essential that a good teacher preparation program helps teachers to focus on their student learning and to track their student learning and to be able to say at the end of the year or at the end of 2 years how their students did against ambitious goals and objectives, whether or not they're aligned with the state test. And we need national systems of data so that we can track how teachers are doing, not just in the years in which they're in a teacher prep program, but over the course of their entire careers. That database does not exist. And so we end up talking about silly inputs at the same time. I would say also, just to pivot a little bit, because we're supposed to be talking about developing teachers for the 21st century. Hopefully, when we come back in another 5 years, or certainly in another 25 years, schools don't look the way they look right now. And if they don't look the same, and classrooms don't look the same, we need to train and develop teachers for the classrooms of the future and not the classrooms of the past. That will mean a whole different set of skills. And the advent of blended learning and personalized learning, it's so new, but there really are not a lot of programs that are paying attention to that and developing teachers in that particular way.
I would say I ditto what Norman said in terms of there not being actually a bunch of objective and reliable data constructs that exist across multiple settings and communities that allow you to actually really understand that. What I will say is I very much agree in terms of how are the students doing within with the teacher that they're with, but I would go up a little further and say really needing to innovate on a longitudinal study in terms of not just how that student did with that teacher, but even over time, and what can we learn both about the student and the teacher that had them at a moment in time. I would also say is that we've seen more studies over time that are saying teachers' own perception of their own self-efficacy matters in terms of how they show up in front of their students in terms of credibility and confidence. And so really being able to take stock of how are teacher leaders themselves feeling about their own preparation, about their own efficacy, and how that's translating to students, and student surveys and parent surveys in terms of what they're seeing about their teacher leader and their students' progress over time. And so I do think it's probably going to take multiple pieces of data sets for us to get a better picture of what that actually means in terms of progress.
So I'm hearing the data are very imperfect, but still worth collecting. Anyone disagree with that? Anyone think it's not worth, that programs shouldn't be measured by these data points? Carl Grant at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, is that, have you embraced looking at data on how teacher candidates perform once they enter the classroom?
Well, I mean, they're tracking to see how students are doing once they leave the university, where they go. But they are not into the classroom assessing that particular test results. Mm-hmm. All right, so that is left up to the school.
Should
but
they?
But the school provides feedback on request. There is a
Qualitative.
movement in that direction to have a better understanding of the graduates who leave like the University of Wisconsin.
And do you support that? Looking at student achievement data of teacher candidates from...
I would say we need to look at whatever we need to look at to better serve the students.
Does that include student achievement data?
I mean, yeah, because a lot of this is about achievement.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Do you have any comments? We have a question from the audience. Amy Wilson from TFA Baltimore, could you come to the microphone? And could we also have Jake Ramsey, Nashville 09, come to the microphone, and Celeste. So are you Amy? Hi, Amy.
Hi.
You want to say your question to the panel?
I don't think the mic's on. I had a loud teacher voice, but I was out late last night.
Here's a mic.
All right, while we wait for your mic,
So I couldn't tell you which one
The
it is.
people in the back hear me? Not, yeah. It's really, really big.
Amy, come up, grab this mic.
thanks.
My question, I think, was where you were getting back to 21st century preparation and this idea that we have this personalized learning emerging for K-12 students because they all start in different places and we're told to pre-assess them and teach them where they are. But so many teacher prep programs, both traditional and alt, still deliver exactly the same training and preparation to everyone. So I'm just wondering what lessons from personalized learning in K-12 can we start applying to teacher ed so they're not talked down to all the time?
All right, thanks for that, Amy. Thanks for the microphone.
Yeah, I think this is essential, and I think everybody, even the so-called innovative programs, are slow to change. And so, in the world of personalized learning, every good teacher is a teacher of exceptional learners, a special ed teacher. We know so much from all the work that we've all been doing around special education all these years to look at every individual student to meet his or her individual needs, and we can take a lot. From that. We also know how freaking hard it is to teach 30 students at the same time when they're all coming from different levels, and we do the best we can to check for understanding, but we're not meeting kids' needs. And so we shouldn't be surprised that the outcomes that we're getting aren't optimal. And so it's such a nascent field, but there are schools and networks. I would point specifically to Summit in California that are beginning to develop the tools and systems not only to help kids with personalized learning tools, but to help teachers to be able to work in that particular direction. At Relay, we've developed a bunch of online modules and training for folks, and I hope that we collectively go out and develop a taxonomy of new practices for new classrooms that we can use in teacher preparation programs. I would say there are a couple people from Teach for America, Jeff Wetzler and Elan Zamora, who are developing an organization called Transcend to start to agitate schools and districts and charter organizations to create these new models, and we're going to need to develop leaders and teachers for those new models.
Norm, yeah, what everyone wants to add on to this. Want to go first? So I think one of the things that's most exciting to me in the personalized learning work is really taking this question of student ownership and student agency on very seriously, and from the youngest of kids all the way through high school to treat students as competent adults and intellectuals. And having walked in and having had the privilege of visiting many of the places that Norm talked about, to see that joy and innovation is really, really palpable. I think what it is asking teacher preparation and professional development, for that matter, is to really shift the mindset of teachers to think about what it means to truly support student agency, truly support student ownership, and take a little more flexible approach. Unfortunately, teacher prep sort of hasn't had this. Like, there's a bunch of stuff in my head, and I'm going to dump it into your body and assume that you're going to go off and do it. But rather thinking about what are the learning environments, what needs to happen in terms of support that would actually help students apply this in real life. So it's only emergent, but there are lots of places I'd also point you to. I'd point you to EDUCAUSE, which is a great source of information that's thinking about this. And the other thing I think is very exciting about the personalized learning space at the moment is many of the people who have been at the forefront of rethinking about preparation in general, TNTP and others, are also now thinking about what schools should look like in the future. So it's just a great way to go back to just checking our assumptions at the door and thinking about what schools should look like for kids, and then working backwards in terms of what preparation and PD should look like for adults.
Susan.
Yes, and I would add on, and when I think about some of the innovation work that we're doing at Teach for America, we have some of our regions who are now starting to do their own regional institutes, their own training programs for that very reason, so that we can see different types of models of training in terms of differentiated paths based on who the core members are in the context. The other thing I would say, which is more of a, not as much of a long-term strategy in terms of different types of pathways into teaching, but I think it actually matters a ton. We end up learning a lot about teacher leaders when they come in, whether from their application, their interviews, about who they are, how they best learn, what brings them into the work. And I think there is more to be done to say, given that information, how do we use that information to ensure that folks are matched in the right ways, to the right programs, to the right classrooms, to the right schools, because what may be good for Susan may not necessarily be good for another person, and if we can think about matching based on the assets that the person are bringing, they can lead from that place, and I think there's more to be done in that realm.
Back to the point about the power of 3 times 4, right? We're getting a lot of questions from people in the audience about the 21st century classroom. One person asked, what will the 21st century classroom have to look like? And then how will we prepare teachers to teach in something that might look very different from what a classroom looks like today? Who would like to jump in?
So, oh gosh. What's the Tyack and Cuban book, Tinkering Toward Utopia? Basically, the grammar of schooling has been fixed for the past century. And so it's very hard for schools to adapt and change. But hoping and working and agitating and innovating for that future, we are all and others are going to go and create it. And And so I would say we should look inside of our own heads and our own communities to figure out what the vision is. Mine is where students are learning rigorous math and English and history and science through their peers, through tutoring, through their teachers in small groups, through large presentations, and through digital tools. And it involves a lot of learning that's happening as they get older, throwing knowledge into new combinations and going outside of the four walls of school. I think we have totally screwed up vocational education in the United States, and that we have a lot of kids who need experiences well beyond what we're doing in our traditional classrooms, and so they need internships and boot camps and opportunities to explore careers early on as they get older. And so I think that we will have networks of schools that have different expertise, and that students will be going back and forth from different buildings to others and going to learning experiences outside of their school.
So how does that change what teaching looks like and what you need to talk about?
So I would, in a glass over wine, we just kind of build on that. But I'd say the thing that I point back to the audience is we have every indication that adults are actually going to matter even more in this context. So Code.org, excellent example. Was just speaking with folks from there. But they have a way that students can get on and use the Code.org platform themselves. They have a training program, and they have a sort of trainer of trainer programs. In the programs where the teachers are actually getting the training to use the technology, that's where they're seeing the greatest results with kids who have had no access to computer science before. And so I think in these schools that are emerging, the way that adults are positioning themselves right next to the kids, there's a great school district in California called Lindsay, California, a very small central rural valley, and teachers call themselves learning facilitators and the kids call themselves learners. And they have really upset the DNA of what it means to be an adult and a kid in a school. So I love the vision, and I would just say we should continue to challenge ourselves about what role we play in that vision, because it's going to be exceedingly powerful and exceedingly important.
And I would add to that is that teacher has often been seen as like expert in classroom. And I think teachers modeling the very thing that we're asking of students in terms of being learners, that we see more also adult learning from one another as part of that process. Everything from peer learning with one another to themselves being exposed to what are the types of 21st century jobs, and to what degree do I even understand what it requires, and am I out there with my student learning about that and together going through the learning process. And so that it's not like a one-way street, but teacher is learning from student is learning from teacher, everyone is understanding the learning process together, and that discovery is actually what pushes the rigor.
Mm-hmm. Carl, do you have a comment?
Yeah. The schools for the 21st century, I would say, would be schools that students want to come to. Many of the schools today, we can sit up here and jaw about what they're going to look like, but first and foremost, they got to be places that kids want to come. And once they come, they have to feel welcome. The other thing I would say is that anyone who read The World is Flat, I mean, going back there, it says we need a new way of thinking, talking, and acting. Ask yourself, are you willing to hand the microphone over to students? One of the things I would like to see happen in the 21st century is for teachers to listen to students. Most of what you read, in fact, even the testing of students, we don't ask students what do they think about all of this. We are still living in a world in which students should be seen and not heard. I would argue for students' voices and agency.
I think it's very powerful. I have to say, as a sometimes technology skeptic or future skeptic, a lot of the things that you guys are describing as the 21st century classroom, I think are 20th century values of many educators, but not enacted, right? Listening to students more, not having engaging learning experiences, small groups. I mean, this isn't new. Also, every time there's a new technology, there's a new idea for how to change. But if you think specifically about kind of some of the at-bats that I've seen teacher prep programs do, practicing giving the main idea of a lesson, or practicing lecture explanations, are those still happening in your programs, and do they need to disappear? Is the structure of a lesson that teachers are prepared for, is that going to be finally obliterated in the way many have been asking for it to be for many years? And is that happening today?
That's a great question. We have a lot of that in our program, and I'm really proud of it because we're trying to train teachers to go into jobs that are so hard, where they are standing in front of 30 students and have to manage the classroom and create culture and teach a complicated lesson. And so all of those systems are absolutely essential for teachers to do their jobs right now. Hopefully, as classrooms and schools change, we will have 8 different jobs when we say what a teacher is. And we'll be training people for all of those different jobs. And the more complicated tasks will be for people who've been at it for longer. And we'll have not only better schools, but easier opportunities for teachers to plug in and lead their classrooms early on.
So we have to hold on to this vision of the future, but for today, you need to know how to introduce a main idea. Anyone think we need to change faster than that? Or teacher prep should lead the change? Or any other comments on that?
I mean, I would say absolutely we need to change faster than that. So I would say the methodology, so for example, at Teach for America, we started off with this thing called the 5-step lesson plan. It was less about the 5 steps and more about the concept of like making sure that it's easy enough for a student to be able to follow your logic and making the material accessible to them. We've moved on along as we've grown and learned over time, knowing that that is like one way of thinking and one way of learning, and there are other ways of discovery and ways of starting actually from the back end and working our way up and having the kid say like what was the objective of what we were trying to do and what that makes you think. And so I certainly think that there are ways that we should definitely move faster and that we have to innovate on all the different ways of thinking about lessons.
So I would build on that. I think you can imagine a world, let's just take math instruction, because maybe it's the most easy one to understand, where someone's using Zearn or ST Math or Dreambox or Khan Academy or School of One. These are all programs that are trying to differentiate math instruction for kids based on their level. But they also are trying to buy teacher time to really work with kids who need help on either acceleration or potentially on catching up. So I am also a little bit of a tech skeptic, ironic for where I work, but not, because it really is about the teacher. Like, I can't imagine a world where a teacher probing student misunderstanding is not important. The context in which they do that, one-on-one, one-on-three, maybe with a more dynamic view of where their students are, might change. But I think I challenge the teacher educators in the room are what are those core sets of competencies that we could agree on that we'd always want teachers to be able to do? Is it building upon students' ideas, probing for misunderstanding? Whatever that core set is, that we would always imagine in an intellectually rich place.
I mean, just to give Norman a chance to respond to this question of how fast does the switch flip, when I've seen some of at your own old institution, some of the work of the math educators there, they're not training on a 5-step lesson plan. They're doing something a lot more complicated, and they're hoping that teachers can do that on day 1, teacher candidates. But so, Norman, do you want to respond to this question of how fast to change? And then also, let's get Jake Ramsey from Nashville. If you're here in the room, please come to the microphone still, and Omar Lopez while Norman responds.
As fast as we can and as slow as we must.
All right, fair. Jake, please share your question with us.
Great, thanks. So my question, I'm a high school principal at KIPP Nashville Collegiate High School, and so much has been done in the past 25 years to improve our skill in teacher training around teacher skills and teacher moves. But what we still see, particularly at the high school level, is that we're not there yet in terms of giving teachers really solid content knowledge. So particularly to teacher preparation programs, what are you excited about in terms of improving our ability to give teachers the content knowledge they need to motivate and inspire students?
I mean, it's essential in this age of Common Core when we've raised the standards significantly. We've been serving our students for such a long time because we don't have teachers who are digging deep and teaching rigorous content. My view is that the content needs to come in college. So one of the reasons why I want to start working with undergraduates is I want them to major in the content areas and to really get a rigorous education of what it is that they're going to end up teaching, while also starting to get practice and motivated about going into teaching. For those who don't particularly have that, we've got to focus as much on content and content pedagogy as we do on general pedagogy. You're absolutely right, and shift the ratio very much in that particular direction and integrate those two as much as possible so that teachers are not just teaching with moves, but they're teaching with moves to get kids to learn the complex material in front of them.
I would say the only thing I would add on is I agree both in terms of the selection model, in terms of what we see candidates coming in with and what does that mean about where we place them, to my differentiation model, like what are the assets they're bringing in and what does that mean about what is the right match for them. The other thing I would say is content is actually ever evolving. The way in which I learn multiplication now is not the way my nephew at home has learned multiplication. And so there are tons of, whether it be online modules, there are tons of programs that are all about making sure that as the years go by and there are different methodologies in terms of thinking about whether it be math or reading, that we're constantly up to speed and that we're putting that in front of like new teachers so that they understand like how does that look different from the very way in which I was trained, because that is usually the way most teachers then try to actually filter that knowledge to their students.
Pushing against the apprenticeship of observation, that how I went to school is not the way that, yes, Carl Grant.
In response to your question, one of the things I think you have to discern is the difference between content and content pedagogical knowledge. There is it's one thing to have knowledge, to have content, but then knowledge of how to teach the content to the people that you're teaching it to. That is a good deal part of it. Now, the content knowledge, a great deal of it is boring. Or, let me choose a better word, it is not inclusive enough for where we want to take it. So we actually need both.
What's boring? Did you say boring?
A lot of the content, I mean, the argument in colleges, if you go back to the 70s, was for a great deal more diversity. That's when you had women's studies departments set up, Latino studies departments, because it was boring. All right? So we're beginning to get those, but we're also beginning to close them down.
So you're saying that teachers need to, the K-12 curriculum needs to be less boring as well and more inclusive?
The K-12 curriculum is boring. I mean, you ask any student. This is why I say you need to talk to your student. It's boring.
So how can we change that?
Listen, one of the things I enjoyed in working with Teach for America back in 1990 is because they were the best and the brightest. And if they knew they didn't know something, they were willing to study and learn it, okay? I mean, if you're working in classrooms where Latino, African American, Hmong students are, you need to know about their history. You need to take that time to investigate and study it. Do we do that? You can't teach what you don't know. And I could go on.
So I'm just interested in the boring idea, because I think that what is the antidote for boringness? You're saying the antidote for boringness in the curriculum is relevance. relevance to the students. Making content relevant, and that's part of pedagogical content knowledge.
I mean, if you go into a number of high school classes and look at the curriculum that's being taught, you look at the students who you're teaching, to what extent are the students interested in a great deal of what's being taught? Because many of the people who are teaching learned about Shakespeare and Browning, and whereas many of the students sitting there want to hear what some of the rappers are saying, which would help them connect.
Right.
Or how do you take Shakespeare and bring it into their lives? All right? So I'm not saying that it can't be taught, but that's where the pedagogical content knowledge comes into being.
I wrote in my book about how after doing a lot of journalism about all of your work, a friend challenged me that I had to try teaching. And I had learned a lot about pedagogical content knowledge and was really into it, thought it was awesome. But when it came to teaching, he asked me to pick some texts for us to read with the students. And I was really proud of myself. I brought these texts to him and I said, I'm ready to go. And he said, these are boring. These are boring. They're gonna not even read past the first sentence. I said, these are great works of writing. They have sex and blood. He said, they're boring. So I have to say, interesting. Is this Omar Lopez?
The one and only.
I can't wait for you to ask your question, and I hope we'll hold boringness in mind as you ask it.
Yeah. So my question is, what policy, city, state, or federal, is the biggest obstacle to improving teacher preparation? Bonus points if you name specific policies.
Yes, please. Thank you. We have candy here, and I will be distributing it to whoever gives the most specific policy that is an obstacle, and take us away, Carl.
All right, let's go back to A Nation at Risk, 1983. If you read it, it says the nation was at risk. They then soon changed that to the children are at risk. Every president, including a race to the top, does not really understand the children in the classroom. It is much more about preparing kids to get a good job than preparing students to have a flourishing life. And there's a difference between just preparing someone to go out and work and preparing them to enjoy the fruits of life. We need both. Each policy from each president up until the present time. And this is one reason why so many of you out there still owe money on your tuition.
Do you want to comment?
So I'll give maybe a little more
Single
long.
policy.
Single policy. So I'd say the biggest lever, potential lever, is the state in my mind. I'd point to two places just off the top of my head, Massachusetts and Florida, that have thought about ways of building systems of providers that are grounded in improvement and accountability. And most of this exists in regulatory things that state agencies do. So different take on your question, but
Why is the state the most important lever?
they control certification.
Why is certification the most important lever when I just heard you all say that student achievement data needs to be collected and looked at, and that's the most important indicator, not something before teachers enter?
But I mean, it's who gets in the door. And certification. So if we're just talking about policy, I mean, there's a limit to what but it's who gets in the door of teaching. So there's the potential. In other words, that's the potential leverage point.
And how does it get used well? What does it look like for that to be used well?
Yeah. So I mean, I think there's a limit to what you can do from the policy side. But Massachusetts, as an example, is using sort of the policies that it has been given to pull together all the preparation programs in the state and build actually, you asked what the system was, build the system of using data for program improvement. So I think to flip the question to say there can be things that are actually leverage points rather than just inhibitors.
No candy for you, but good idea.
Tried to answer the question.
Two thoughts. One is we need a GI Bill for teachers. We need to basically say, if you're going to go into teaching for 5 years, we will pay for your undergraduate education in order to get dramatically different people coming into the profession. Secondly, the number one barrier I see to the residency model, which I really do believe is very promising for developing teachers, is getting districts to invest early in paying people a stipend or a salary during the residency year so that they can get trained through an apprenticeship and then go on to full-time jobs. And I believe that there's a possibility of utilizing various federal and state resources and current budget lines to be able to do that, but we need the districts to start to think imaginatively about that, and we need to go and evaluate that so that we can prove out that that's a good investment over time.
All right, so maybe just the inhibitor being how dollars are spent. Do you have one biggest policy inhibitor, Susan?
I don't know if I have a policy inhibitor, but I will say that many of the policies, like No Child Left Behind, that are meant to make sure that we're looking at data and using that as a way to say to what degree are we truly serving all students. To Dr. Grant's point, really saying, are we thinking about the whole child, and to what degree might there be we might be disincentivizing the right behavior in terms of what's in the best interest of the kids and communities.
Thank you for your comments. Emily Hart, are you still with us? Yes, please come to the microphone. And while you're preparing to ask your question, I'm just going to read a question that was submitted anonymously, which I think is similar. I am familiar with only the program that I went through to become certified. I only had to take one class about diverse learners, which briefly touched on special ed. I did not learn about crucial things like IEPs or 504s. Did not learn about those things. Are the TFA programs, alternative and traditional, too fast or superficial to prepare teachers to work in special education with the most vulnerable learners? And I think you can see, Emily, how this is connected to your question, so
Yeah.
please share.
So the session's about evolving teacher preparation, right? I want to know how you all think TFA specifically needs to evolve its teacher preparation. I know about the program where they get juniors in college. I know, Norm, you're talking about a lot of the, how can we get them in apprenticeships and residencies. But, I mean, fundamentally, if we're all alum, we had 5 weeks of training before we are in front of children fully responsible for them. And everything you're saying, to me, sounds like that should be something that we are all critical of and or want to improve upon. So I'm curious, how do you think that TFA, starting next year, starting this summer, can change that 5-week training?
Thank you for your question.
I can start with that by saying some of the things that we're already starting to pilot. Everything from, similar to what Norman talked about, we're starting to engage with college students much earlier, as early as their freshman year, folks who are interested in Teach for America and beginning internships, summer programs, summer teaching experiences, so that the first time that they're entering into understanding the context into which we teach, understanding the practice and art of teaching is not just when they step in our doors. And I think that elongates the runway in terms of the practice of teaching way before the very first day of Institute. I think the second thing is actually really hitting on the fact that 5 weeks of teaching is never our understanding that 5 weeks is actually going to prepare you. And that actually the journey of teaching is much longer than that, and that there needs to be ongoing support and development way beyond that 5 weeks of teaching that moves into the 2 years and beyond. We have many alumni who clearly are staying in education, and how we there's more to do to actually utilize their learnings and master teachers in support of them. So I would say the biggest thing is the runway of teaching is the greatest way that we are thinking differently about how do we stretch the practice time way beyond just 5 weeks and think of support and development as a journey versus a moment in time.
But Susan, there's no plans to say, we're imagining a future where we have a radically different model in terms of that 5 weeks will still be that 5 weeks. We're going to say maybe TFA should actually embrace the residency model itself, for example, and just change the whole nature of the core, especially at a time, as we all know, TFA has a lot of major decision points at this moment in time, a lot of changes in the environment across the country, a lot of questions being asked internally, externally. So is there anything outside of even the box
So I would
that would be
say-
ever possible?
Absolutely. So I would say with our localized model, so I talked about the regional institutes, what is created is opportunities for us to see different types of ways of elongating that. So for example, we have in our Memphis Institute, they have combined their induction as well as their orientation, so that 5 weeks has now expanded to become much longer than that 8 and 9 weeks. We have created what we call like the summer experience between the first and second year of teaching, where we don't call it a summer institute, but we call it the core member summit, where people between the first and second year are coming back now, having had the first year experience, reflecting on that experience, thinking about what they've learned thus far, and having even more chance to learn not just from Teach for America, not just from alumni, but from other programs and other teachers nationwide who can also help strengthen and refine what they've learned over time with respect to content and other aspects of teaching.
So is it possible that if Memphis has really great results with a 9-week program, maybe 5 years from now, all of TFA will be 9 weeks, or some other change like that could happen?
I think it's too premature to tell. I think the whole purpose of this is the spirit of innovation, that we want to learn. And so we want to actually see different models. We want to see those models in different contexts and actually test out what do we learn from those different contexts. Is it community-based, and that's why it worked in that context? Is it actually something about the model itself that translates across all of our models? And so I think the innovation is the thing that right now we believe like the learning platform is going to be our way into really being able to see, are there different ways that we should be thinking about training?
Anyone who's not Susan, who's not working at Teach for America, but with Teach for America on this panel, want to suggest how you see the organization could maybe rethink outside of the box in the way that the question is presented?
So Teach for America is an amazing learning organization, and the recent efforts to decentralize, so you now have 50 regions, you are opening up the sluice gates of innovation. And I think it's exactly what Susan described, is empowered to make change in their regions. Various TFA core groups are going to start to figure out new ways of doing things, and the community of learners should be open to adapt on the basis of what's learned, and it's a really promising development. And I'd call out TFA Delaware trying to redo their Summer Institute in partnership with us. It's really fun to work alongside of great people and try to figure out how to do things differently.
Andrew Ratner from City College of New York. All right, run up here. We're going to have really lightning fast, and then we're going to do final thoughts from our panelists. This has been a really fun, and I hope majority non-boring discussion of teacher education. Thank you guys so much. Final question, Andrew, and Norman, I think it's for you.
Oh, before you said how should change happen, you said fast as it can, slow as it needs to be. And my question was, does opening so many graduate relay schools in such a short time, where does that fit into that axiom?
So we're getting lots of demand from communities across the country to develop our program, and given how eager we are to help students in those communities to have teachers who will love them and be able to teach them well, we're eager to get involved as much as we can, and we have the capacity to grow, and especially as we move to communities like the Bay Area, where there's an emphasis on new models of classrooms, it will push us to work faster to innovate the way in which we're training teachers along the lines of personalized learning, blended learning, and other models.
I would just, as someone who's had his foot in both worlds for a long time, having been a support director in Louisiana at the beginning and having been involved with KIPP for a number of years and now as a university professor, I'm really pointing to another comment, which is the university system moves slowly, and change and reform happens slowly, whereas maybe change in this world is happening sort of much more quickly. But I think, perhaps what's in my question is in the sort of rush and reform to move and not do things as deliberately and slowly as a university, sometimes I feel it's done without any reasonable, reasons beyond the ones you just gave. The reasons you just gave for opening so many grad schools so quickly was that
So
there
I
was
think you're saying, like, is there a cost to speed? The trade-off of
Yeah,
outside
I guess
and
two
inside.
questions. Is there a
And
cost
I think
to
we have to
speed?
keep it to one, so thank you
Yeah.
so much for your comments, but we have 5 minutes and I'm gonna wrap up. But I think it's an interesting point that you're raising about those trade-offs. So do you want one quick response, and then I'm gonna ask you guys to close with a thought each.
The quick response is we have to balance the fierce urgency of now with being thoughtful and planful and doing a great job. We're not going to be able to push a button and get everything right away, but we need to start to move, to innovate and create change, and I feel great about what's happening.
All right, final question for each of you. Can you please challenge this group of people gathered here today with a shared mission and a shared interest in teacher preparation's role in achieving that mission? What's the one challenge you would issue to everyone in this room to build better teachers for our future?
So I would continue to push you to think about what the role of teacher will look like in the future, and how connecting to the listening to students and actually thinking about what students want for themselves as well, how the role of teacher can facilitate that, and what role preparation would play.
I would say something I try to do every quarter is, from the beginning of starting my day, walk through the shoes of a student, from like getting on the bus to getting in the classroom to listening to the teacher, and literally going through every step of their day. And I have found that it has really challenged me both to see why we see the types of things that we're seeing, and has spurred different types of innovation as well. So I would say, like, really seeing things from the lens of the student, and not just seeing it and asking them, but experiencing it alongside them.
Awesome. Thank you. Carl.
I would like you to go back to the moment when you said, I want to teach. I want to join Teach for America. And then you picked up the phone and you called someone significant. And you said to them, you know what I want to do? I want to teach. And they said, you want to do what? Why? And you said, here's the reason. I want you to go back to you and revisit what you said and how you replied, and basically go forward on your own words.
Thank you. Finally, Norman.
70% of America's teachers major in education as undergraduates. May they all go out and become great teachers. Meanwhile, let's change the ecosystem of how young people develop during their undergraduate years. Let's build an ecosystem where they're majoring in math and science and English and history, and let's give them opportunities to start working in schools as tutors and mentors and summer school teachers and residents, so that we can start to match incredibly talented, diverse young people into the schools that we need in the future.
Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really looking forward to being here in another 5 years to see how this field emerges. Thank you.